So D&D is a fantasy game, but how realistic should your game be?
You know, that's a fine line to ride
Mm.
as a DM, as players. At what point does it become a fantasy game and not just some athletics game in the backyard? There's got to be a fine balance between rules that we have here on Earth versus, what we allow as, super cool throwing, the barbarian throwing a boulder the size of a house at someone. If the mechanics allow it, maybe, but there's still got to be some level of realism to the game, something to grasp onto, so that we kind of have an understanding about how we can act.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it kind of probably depends on, whatever your style is as a DM, right? Are you more of like a loosey goosey DM who lets a lot of other things slide, or are you pretty righty tighty where you stick pretty hard to classic physics and you know uh, make sure that players aren't, I don't know, floating in the air too much. We'll put it that way. But it is important to stay consistent. I think you're right. Right. Which whatever side you're going to kind of lean on that seesaw, definitely be consistent because you definitely don't want to be changing rules on players as they go. Right. That
Right.
probably a problem.
Yeah, if you're gonna make a set rule that's different than what you're used to, you got to make sure you stick with that. I mean, but the game has mechanics. There are rules. There's a whole 3 books about it.
That's true.
On on a lot of different things and mechanics in the way you're supposed to jump and the distance you can cover. How much hit points something has, and then that's something that has come up, at least for me in the past, and maybe even for you, of, well, why I snuck up behind him, I've got a knife, why can't I just kill him?
Hmm.
Well, he's got an HP pool. It's like, yeah, but realistically, well, we're still in a fantasy world where there's got to be some boundaries to how OP you can be in that scenario. um, there's probably other games that are more realistic, and it might be better to just go play those games, but it also comes a little bit to, I guess, the rule of cool. At what point, does the cool moment need more fantasy than realism
A
to
little more
be?
help from the
Yeah.
yeah, the DM.
The Legolas moment where he jumps on the back of the troll and puts an arrow in his head. In D&D, maybe that's not enough to kill it, but there's some really cool mechanics in D&D fantasy wise that'll allow that movie moment to come to life, where in real life maybe that's a lot harder and easier said than done.
Sure.
But
Yeah. Like if your action economy doesn't allow for something to happen,
right.
you can't grapple and shoot and jump and, um, and so yeah, you may have
Yeah.
to give it a little bit. But yeah, I like that. All right. If it's not gonna damage, your game, and if you're not like, again, rule of cool does not mean, oh, I rolled a nat 20 so I can fly like Superman to the big bad evil guy and punch him in the face with my laser eyes and yada yada. Like again, that's not the rule of cool. That's just cheating at that point. I don't even know what to call that. But so yeah, so I think that's a good point, right? And again, like if you think about it, every single video game or game out there has its own, engine, right? It's got its own physics engine. Now you can tweak and play with those parameters as needed. Um, and and heck, you could do that on different planes. Like, you could have a moon plane that you can, you float around a little more, and maybe combat's a little more fun in that sense of you move double or you jump, you know, twice as far and things like that, and allow your players to have some fun with things. But again, I think yeah, consistency is uh, probably key on that. So
You know, and I've been trying to think of a good example of this, and it's been really hard, but something that just came to my mind of a good example of the rule of cool versus, an actual rule set in the game of, let's take an archer in the game, someone who, like a ranger, who's got a really high to hit bonus, it's really hard for them to miss. They could shoot the nads off a squirrel at 30 yards. Um, and well, if I'm so precise, why can't I, shoot and have it hit this pillar and it bounces off the wall and it hits someone around the corner? It's like, okay, well, if you're just doing that so that you can literally shoot anyone anywhere, that's kind of breaking the rules of the game. But if you take, the last shot and that's the final blow to that creature, and they describe their arrow as they shoot and it ricochets off the helmet of one of their neighbors and it glances and gets them right through the eye, that's a cool descriptive moment. It's not saying that, hey, I shot around corners and I'm going to do it now for every single enemy that I don't see. And so the rule of cool versus an actual rule change, there is a defining line, um, that kind of is hard to not cross, but at the same time, in that moment, it's a descriptive way that they didn't actually shoot around a corner, but
Yeah.
they're describing it in a cool way of how they ended up killing them. And that's
Right.
different than saying, hey, I shot and ricocheted my arrow off of 3 surfaces and then still critically hit the target. Like, no, that's
Right.
no.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, right? So you have you have rules and you're consistent with those rules, which is kind of like your foundation. And then you can kind of build on top of that and allow those short filled moments of cool to happen. But like you said, you're not changing the rule. You maybe
Mhm.
are like bending the rule in that instance, but you're not like, all right, now we can just ricochet things off of
Right,
walls and hit whatever you want to do as long as you roll high enough, right? As long
right.
as you as you do that. So yeah,
No,
that's a good point.
that's a good point you bring up, Christian. A big misconception we have in D&D is that a 20 is an end all be all. I get to do exactly what I want, no matter
Yes.
what the rules say.
Well,
And I
isn't it?
think
Just kidding.
no, it's not. Technically, an at 20 only applies to combat when you're making an attack roll.
Mm,
If you roll a 20 for an athletics check, yeah, you literally rolled the highest you could possibly roll, but it's not a critical success. A lot of people, it's kind of become a stigma now that it's a you get to do whatever you want because you
right.
rolled the one, 5% chance die roll you could have, you know. You don't get to now fly across the room and
Dang.
laser kill someone with your eyes like you just said.
Can I just Naruto run up the wall? No hands.
In the new rule set,
Throw him behind my
probably.
back. Ooh, now we're talking. Now we're talking. So,
I
anyhow,
mean, once again, you got to play with the rule of cool and how that works. Maybe the Nat 20 does allow them to be a little bit more creative, but don't let them go too extravagant to where it's like, okay, but you let me do
pushing
it
your
before.
limits. Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.